The dates have mostly slipped out of my head. I supposed I could have my granddaughter Danielle look at some of them out of the old newspaper files, but what would be the point? The most important of them, like the day we came down to Delacroix's cell and found the mouse sitting on the shoulder, or the day William Wharton came into the block and almost killed Dean Stanton, would not be in the papers anyways. Maybe it's better to go on just as I have been. In the end, I guess the dates don't matter much. If you can remember the things you saw and keep them in the right order. I know that things got squeezed together a little when Delacroix's DOE papers finally came to me from Curtis Anderson's office. I was amazed to see our Cajun Pal's date with Old Sparky had been advanced from what I was expected. A thing you almost unheard of, even in those days when you don't have to move half of heaven and all of earth to execute a man. It was a matter of 2 days, I think. From the 27th of October to the 25th. Don't hold me to it exactly, but I know that's close. I remember thinking that Toot was going to get his coronavirus even sooner than he had expected. Wharton, meanwhile, got to us later than expected. For one thing, his trial ran longer than Anderson's usually reliable sources had thought it would. When it came to Wild Billy, nothing was reliable. We would soon discover, including our time-tested and supposedly foolproof methods of prisoner control. Then after he had been found guilty, that much at least went according to the script, he was taken to Indianola General Hospital for tests. He had a number of supposed seizures during the trial, twice serious enough to send him crashing to the floor, where he lay shaking and flopping and drumming his feet on the boards. Wharton's court-appointed lawyer claimed he suffered from epilepsy spells, and he had committed the crimes while unsound mind. The prosecution claimed the fits were the sham of acting coward desperate to save his own life. After observing the so-called epilepsy spells at first hand, the jury decided the fits were an act. The judge concurred, but orders a series of pre-sentencing tests after the verdict came down. God knows why. Perhaps he was only curious. It's a blue-eyed wonder that Wharton didn't escape from the hospital, and the irony that Warden Moore's wife, Melinda, was in the hospital at the same time did not escape any of us. But he didn't. They had him surrounded by guards, I suppose, and perhaps he still had hopes of being declared incompetent by reason of epilepsy, if there was ever such a thing. He wasn't. The doctors found nothing wrong with his brain, psychologically at least, and Billy the Kid Wharton was at last bound for Cold Mountain. It might have been around the 16th or the 18th. It's my recollection that Wharton arrived about 2 weeks after John Coffey, and a week or 10 days before Delacroix walked the Green Mile. The day our new psychopath joined us was an eventful one for me. I woke up at 4 that morning with my groin throbbing and still feeling hot and clogged and swollen. Even before I swung my feet out of bed, I knew that my urinary infection wasn't getting any better as I had hoped. It had been a brief turn for the better, that was all, but it was over. I went to the privy to do my business. This was at least 3 years before we got our first water closet, and had gotten no further than the woodpile in the corner of the house when I realized I couldn't hold any longer. I lowered my pajama pants and it just started to flow. That flow was accompanied by the most excruciating pain of my entire life. I passed a gallstone in 56, and I know what the people say that is the worst, but the gallstone was like a touch of acid and indigestion compared to this outrage. My knees came unhinged and I fell heavily onto them, tearing out the seat of my pajama pants when I spread my legs to keep losing my balance, and going face first into a puddle of my own piss. Might have gone over if I hadn't grabbed one of the woodpile logs with my left hand. All that, though, could have been going on in Australia or even another planet. All I was concerned with the pain that had set me on fire. My lower belly was burning, and my organ, which had gone mostly forgotten by me when providing the most intense physical pleasure man can experience, was now felt as if it was melting. I expected to look down and see blood gushing from the tip, but it appeared to be a perfectly ordinary stream. I hung onto the woodpile with one hand and put a gun across my mouth, concentrating on keeping my mouth shut. I did not want to frighten my wife awake with a scream. It seemed that I went on pissing forever, but at last the stream dried up. By then the pain had sunk deep into my stomach, biting like rusty teeth. For a long while, it might have been as long as a minute, I was physically incapable of getting up. At last the pain began to abate and I struggled to my feet. I looked down, already soaking into the ground, and wondered if any sane God would make a world where a little bit of dampness would come at the cost of such horrendous pain. I would call in sick, I thought, and go see Dr. Sadler after all. I didn't want the stink and the queasiness of Dr. Sadler's sulfa tablets, but anything would be better than kneeling beside the woodpile trying not to scream. Well, my prick was reporting I had apparently been doused with coal oil and set afire. Then I was swallowing aspirin in her kitchen and listened to Jan snore loudly in the other room. I remembered that today was the day that William Wharton was scheduled on the block, and that Brutal wouldn't be there. The roster had him over on the other side of the prison, helping to move the rest of the library and some leftover infirmary equipment to the new building. One thing I didn't feel right about, in spite of my pain, was leaving Wharton to Dean and Harry. They were good men, but Curtis Anderson's report had suggested that William Wharton was exceptionally bad news. This man just doesn't care, he had written, underlining for emphasis. By then the pain had abated some, and I could think. The best idea, it seemed to me, was leave for the prison early. Get there at 6 was about the time that Warden Moores usually came in. He could get Brutus Howell reassigned to E-Block long enough before Warden's reception. I'd make my long overdue trip to the doctor. Cold Mountain was actually on my way. Twice on the 20-minute ride to the penitentiary. That sudden need to urinate overcame me. Both times I was able to pull over and take care of the problem without embarrassing myself. For one thing, traffic on country roads in such hours all but non-existent. Neither of these two voidings was as painful as the one that had taken me off my feet on the way to the privy, but both times I had to clutch the passenger side door handle of my little Ford coupe to hold myself up, and I could feel sweat running down my hot face. I was sick, all right, good and sick. I made it, though. Drove in through the south gate, parked in my usual place, and went right up to see the warden. It was going on 6 by then. Miss Hannah's office was empty. She wouldn't be in until a relatively civilized hour of 7, but the light was on in Moore's office. I could see through the pebbled glass. I gave a perfunctory knock and opened the door. Moores looked up, startled to see anyone at this unusual hour, and I would get in a great deal not to be the one to see him in that condition. His face was naked and unguarded. His white hair, usually so neatly combed, was sticking up in tufts and tangles. His hands were in it, yanking and pulling when I walked in. His eyes were raw, the skin between him puffy and swallowed. His palsy was the worst I'd ever seen it. He looked like a man who had just come in after a long walk on a terribly cold night. Hal, I'm sorry, I'll come back, I began. No, he said, please, Paul, come in. Shut the door and come in. I need someone now, if I ever need anyone in my whole life. Shut the door and come in. I did as he asked, forgetting my own pain for the first time since I awakened this morning. It's a brain tumor, Morse said. They got x-ray pictures of it. They seem real pleased with their pictures, actually. One of them said that maybe the best ones anyone's ever gotten, at least so far. They're going to publish them in some biggity medical journal up in New England. It's the size of a lemon, they said, way down deep inside where they can't operate. They say she'll be dead by Christmas. I haven't told her. I can't think how. I can't think how for the life of me. Then he began to cry, big gasping sobs that filled me with both pity and a kind of terror. When a man who keeps himself as tightly guarded as Hal Morris finally does lose control, it's frightening to watch. I stood there for a moment, then went to him and put my arm around his shoulders. He groped out to me with both of his own arms, like a drowning man, and began to sob against my stomach, all restraint washed away. Later, after he got himself under control, he apologized. He did it without quite meeting my eyes, as a man does when he has embarrassed himself quite dreadfully. Maybe so deeply that he can never quite live it down. A man can end up hating the fellow who has seen him in such a state. I thought Warden Morse was better than that, but it never crossed my mind to do the business I had originally came for, and when I left Moore's office, I walked back over to E-Block instead of back to my car. The aspirin was working by then, and the pain in my midsection had go down to a low throb. I could get through the day so far. Somehow, I reckoned, get Warden settled in it, check back in with Hal Moore's after that afternoon, and get my sick leave for tomorrow. The worst was pretty much over, I thought, with no slightest idea that the worst of the day's mischief hadn't even begun.